Good evening, everyone. It's time for us to get started tonight. We're winding down our study of parenting. And tonight we're going to be looking at something that's not often addressed in parenting classes, but it's very much a part of the process. And that is what's called the empty nest syndrome. When parents have served their time, done their duty, got all the kids out of the house, then they're stuck with an empty nest. What then? And that's what we're going to be talking about in our study tonight. Before we begin, let's go to God in prayer. We're so thankful, Father, for the good day that you've given us. We're grateful for the spring season, for the promise of new life that we see around us. We are thankful for the opportunity that we have to come together as your people this evening in this comfortable building and to share in a study of your word, to glean wisdom from your book that can help us be more effective servants in this world. We realize, Father, that we are surrounded by a great deal of evil and wickedness. There are so many who do not recognize you or your role in our lives, and it's very tempting sometimes to join in that kind of skeptical viewpoint of life, but we recognize that you are, in fact, our Creator, you are our guide, you are our King, you are the one to whom we owe all allegiance, and we pray that you might help us to maintain that throughout the days that lie ahead in this life. Pray that you would be with those who could not be with us this evening, you would watch over and care for them. And especially be with us, Father, those of us who are still involved in the task of raising our children, that we will do this job well, and that we will raise up children who will be a credit and honor to your name. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, so what we're going to do this evening is start out by just looking at empty nesters in the Bible. There are actually a number of examples of parents who did their job of raising their kids, and then what happened in the aftermath of that. The first example we want to consider this evening, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but just kind of refresh our memory of this story. The story of Isaac and Rebekah. And who are their kids? Jacob and Esau, twins, right? And of course, that was the classic case of sibling rivalry. The struggle between Jacob and Esau was just a perpetual thing. But it's interesting that when you read chapters 27 and 28 of the book of Genesis, which tells the story of Isaac and Rebekah and their two sons, and the dysfunctions that inflicted this family, it's pretty obvious that Isaac and Rebekah, the parents, had a hard time letting go of their sons. When you read the story, of course, we're familiar with the story. I won't go into all the details, but Isaac wanted to bestow the blessing upon his favorite son, Esau, and Rebekah caught wind of that, and she wanted to trick her husband into bestowing the blessing upon her favorite son, which was Jacob. But when you look at the details here, were these boys like teenagers at this time? No, they were grown men. Now, I recognize that there's an element in play in this story that it's kind of hard for us to grasp, the idea of the patriarch of the clan. Isaac was the patriarch, and even when his boys were older, they still revered him, honored him in a way that is rather difficult for us today to appreciate. But even given that, it's obvious that Isaac and Rebekah could not let their boys go. They were continually trying to control them, to stay involved in their lives, and manipulate them to accomplish what they wanted for themselves. And was this healthy for the boys, just based on your knowledge of the story? No, it wasn't healthy at all. Now, of course, this is a classic case you see quite often in the Bible where God can actually use human rebellion, human flaws and mistakes to accomplish a greater plan or purpose. And that's what was happening here. But I just find it interesting that we have a case here of a mom and dad who just had a hard time letting their kids go and could not help but sticking their hands in affairs of their children that they really had no business getting involved in. Also, you read on in the Bible, and we read just a brief mention in 1 Samuel 22 of the parents of David. Who was David's dad? What was his name? Jesse. Very good. And does anybody recall his mother's name? I didn't even research that. I don't know that her name is ever mentioned anywhere. How many brothers did David have? It was more than several. Do you remember when Samuel was sent by God to anoint David as king? He said, it's going to be one of the sons of Jesse. And so who did Samuel automatically suspect it was going to be? The oldest son, Eliab. And God said, nope, he's not the one. So they went to the next one. Nope, it's not him. Next one, nope, it's not him. Went through 7 brothers. And David was apparently brother number 8. He was the runt of the litter. And of course, you're familiar with the story of David and all the travails that he went through. But it's interesting that when David was on the run, trying to get away from Saul, who was out to kill him, we're told in this passage in 1 Samuel 22, verses 3 and 4, that as David fled to the wilderness, first of all, he made provisions for his parents to be taken care of by the king of Moab. And we don't know exactly what the relationship was between David and the king of Moab, but David apparently had enough confidence in that relationship that he could entrust his parents to the care of the king of Moab. And I offer this as an example of the empty nest because here's a case where the parents have done their job. You know, David is a young man now. He's probably in his 20s, which means his older brothers are even older than that. And yet it's fallen to David now to take care of his parents. They apparently did a pretty decent job of raising these boys. At least they certainly did a good job in raising David. And now all the hard work and the sacrifice they put into raising these boys, and particularly David, now it comes back to their benefit. David is watching out for them. He's taking care of them in their later years. Go to the New Testament, and I think we can call Mary, the mother of Jesus, an empty nester. By all accounts, by the time that Jesus started his ministry, his father Joseph, his earthly father, Joseph was dead and gone because he's never mentioned anywhere in the record. It's only Mary. But there's an interesting passage here. Turn to Mark chapter 3. We're going to take a look at this. It's rather fascinating. In verse 21 of chapter 3, and this is in the midst of Jesus' ministry. He's doing all this work, appointing apostles, and the multitudes are thronging around him. We're told in verse 21, when his own people heard about this, they went out to lay hold of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. Does anybody have a different reading? He's lost his senses. Okay. Now then, who are these, his own people? When his own people heard this, they went to, we would call this, they're going to stage an intervention. They think Jesus is just, he's kind of gone off the rocker here. But look in verse 31. Then his brothers and his mother came, and standing outside, they sent to him, calling him. And a multitude was sitting around him, and they said to him, look, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. Most commentators think, and I think it's correct, that his own people in verse 21 is a reference to his brothers and his mother. So here you have mom who's worried about her older son. That, he's doing some crazy things here. And she's really worried about him. And so this is what we would call an intervention. She's trying to intervene and save him from himself. And then, and this is a rather odd one to put on the list, but I think it's fitting. In Matthew 15, we have a case of Jesus addressing the Pharisees, scribes and Pharisees. And in this chapter, he is Jesus is coming down hard on the Pharisees. They are criticizing him in verse 2 for not washing their hands. And then he said to them in verse 3, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, 'Honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death.' But you say, 'Whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God, then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you've made the commandment of God of no effect.'" Now this is, I know this is kind of a stretch, but just think through what Jesus is describing here. What were the scribes and Pharisees prone to do with regard to their parents? Parents invested so much in raising them, giving them a good education, getting them started in life, and now these men have become pillars of their community. They are looked up to and revered as decent, honorable, godly, righteous men, unlike the rest of the population. And how are these decent, godly men treating their parents? What are they doing? Yeah. The implication here is honor your father and mother means you take care of them in their older age. And the Pharisees were wiggling around the law to excuse themselves from the obligation of taking care of their parents. And so here we have empty nesters who are basically being neglected by the kids to whom those parents had invested such time and effort in the younger days. And Jesus just blasted these guys for this. Your parents deserve better than what you're doing for them. Anyway, these are just examples that we have in the Bible of parents who have done their time, they've done their work, they've raised their kids, and now they're in their later years, and here's, good or bad, the life that they live. And that's what we're going to be talking about now for the remainder of our lesson this evening. We want to notice two challenges that empty nesters have to deal with. The first challenge is recognizing the new boundaries that now exist with your adult children. Now, we've talked about in recent lessons having to set boundaries for our children. Why do we have to do that when they're little? Yeah, they recognize no boundaries. You know, just the little kids, they're going to do whatever. And so it's your job as parents to set boundaries for them. And so we recognize the importance of boundaries. We're trying to teach boundaries. Well, now when your kids have learned the lessons, hopefully, that you have taught them, they've grown up, they're responsible citizens now, adults, what's changed? Is it still your job to set boundaries for them? There are new boundaries, except now, to whom do the boundaries apply? The parents. Mom and dad have to recognize now, you've done your job, you've gotten these kids off out in the world, doing their thing, and now you have to recognize they're adults now. They are responsible citizens, Christians, whatever they are. In some cases, probably spouses and parents themselves, and now there are boundaries that you have to recognize as the parent who has done his or her job. And it's very important that older parents recognize these boundaries that exist. So that's one of the challenges that parents have to deal with as their kids grow up and leave home. But the second challenge is reconnecting with your spouse. For the last 20, 25 years, what has your life been devoted to for the most part? Children, taking care of these kids, getting them off on the right foot in life. And you've just poured so much of your time and your attention and your affection into these kids. And now that the kids, you've done your job, the kids are left home, they're gone, and you sit around the house, and who do you have to deal with now? Your spouse. And that can be a challenge. Now, I know it sounds like to some parents, oh, just give me a chance. You know, I'm looking forward to the day. Well, trust me, when that day comes, for some parents, it's a problem. I was reading one statistic the other day that said that 30% of divorces occur among older people, parents whose kids have left home. And they had a hard time then readjusting to just life with one another. And that's sad. And that's unfortunate. But that's part of the challenge here that empty nesters have to deal with. Well, let's consider a Bible verse that I think addresses both of these, and that's one that we're very familiar with. In the very beginning, Genesis 2, God said, "A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." How many marriages are in view in this verse? Trick question. 2. What are they? Okay, the father and mother, and then their son. A man shall leave father and mother, be joined to his wife. So now we've got a new family unit that's been formed, right? So consider what the Lord is saying here in this verse. A man shall leave his father and mother. Now, does that mean he just abandons them? He rejects them as though he never knew them? No. It means the relationship is different now. They've done their job. He has benefited from all the work and the labor that they have invested into him. And now he's leaving them in their care and their oversight, and he is joining himself to his wife. That's the second marriage that's in view here. And that's now a separate relationship. So that really addresses the first thing we're talking about here, recognizing the new boundaries. That when your kids grow up and leave home, and especially if they get married, if they start another family unit, you have to recognize the boundary now that exists between you and your marriage, your house, and this new house, this new family that has been established. But at the same time, he, the son in this case, is joined to his wife, and that's where his primary attention is focused. Now, he still has an obligation to his mom and dad. We've touched on that in Matthew 15. He still has a certain degree of obligation to his mom and dad in the later years, but his primary responsibility now is to his wife and his family. And because of that then, the mom and dad have to learn how to rekindle the relationship. By the way, the father and mother in this verse, now obviously we're talking about Adam and Eve, and that's the exception to the rule here, but in most cases, how does father and mother get started? What kicked off that relationship? Well, true. Now, actually, what I'm getting at is, a man shall leave his father and mother. Well, what did father do back in his younger days? What did he have to do? He had to leave his father and mother. And the same for, of course, for mom. She had to leave her parents, be joined to her husband, and that's what created the original father and mother. And now you've got another relationship, another marriage, another house that's being formed. And so the joining together that took place in the early years, now mom and dad in their older years, they're having to learn how to reconnect again. The original joining when they were younger, they were so full of romance and excitement and joy. Well, a lot of that has kind of died away through all those years of raising kids. Well, now they have to, there's just the two of them again, they have to learn how to reconnect, how to rejoin, recreate the enthusiasm, the joy of those original years. So, how do we prepare for the empty nest? Now, I'm talking here not to the people who have already made the transition to the empty nest. I'm talking about the parents who are still involved with raising your kids. What can you do right now with the kids in the family, in the home, to prepare for that day when they finally leave? Just a few suggestions here. Number one, develop hobbies and interests that the two of you can do together. Why is that important? Well, they have interests that are the same, but why is it important that they have interests that are the same? They can enjoy spending time with one another, yeah. And that's not to say that Melissa enjoys cooking, I enjoy woodworking. Guess what? I'm not a cook, she's not a woodworker. Now, does that make us incompatible? No, because there's so many other things that we do enjoy doing together. So there are just certain things that you should try as much as possible to develop some commonalities that you really enjoy spending time with one another. And along with that, schedule some child-free time. Hire a babysitter. Get grandma or grandpa to watch the kids for a little while so that you and your spouse can have some quality time together to reconnect and maintain the kind of warmth and passion in your relationship that you ought to have. And then finally, this is very important, don't make your kids the center of your life. Your job is to raise your kids, not idolize them. What do I mean by making an idol of your kids? Worry about everything they do and say? Most parents are going to do that anyway. Now, idolizing is something that takes it to another level. Being controlling. What role did idols play in Old Testament history in particular for the Israelites? Why was idolatry so bad for them? It took them away from God and their relationship to God. If your kids are so important, you sacrifice everything for your kids and their welfare and their happiness, and you're going to be the best parent, and those kids never... Nor the kids are going to have a parent like your kids are going to have because of everything you're investing in them. Probably what's going to happen? Who's going to get cut out of the deal? God. God. You are investing so much of your life into those kids. By the way, how did the idols turn out for the Israelites? Not very well. The idols always disappoint. They always let you down. If you make idols out of your children, they're going to let you down. They're going to disappoint you. And you are going to be crushed. You're going to be ruined because you invested so much in those kids. And pretty much like you said, Janice, they're going to recognize they're carrying a burden that they cannot bear. It's not fair to them for you to put them on the pedestal and just make them the center of your life. Your primary concern should be to God. Your secondary concern should be to your spouse. Children are down the list. That doesn't mean you ignore them. It doesn't mean you treat them like trash. But it means they have to recognize their appropriate place in your hierarchy of relationships. So don't let your children become an idol. Okay, the goal of parenting is to raise a child who is comfortable enough to leave you. To raise a child who is comfortable enough to leave you means you've done your job. They are not ours to keep, but to teach how to soar on their own. I could not track down who originally made that statement. You find it all over the internet. But it really, I think, captures the essence of what it means to be an effective parent. Your job is to raise your kids. Get them started on their life. It is not your job to make them an idol in your life, to fulfill yourself. And it's important that while our kids are at home, that we understand that we recognize that hierarchy. There's another quote that I ran across that I thought was pretty effective that addressed this challenge of reconnecting with one's spouse after the kids have left. Steph Daniel is the author. She writes, with an empty nest often comes the vivid realization that you also have an empty marriage. Tending to family tends to take the immediate attention off of the faults in your relationship. In fact, it is easy to sort of coexist with your partner when you are amidst the hustle and bustle of raising a family. Long periods of time without sex, without intimacy, without communication can simply be written off as part of the price you pay for having children. But in the long run, the ties that connected the two of you together become extremely broken and extremely difficult to reconnect. See what the author is saying here? You don't recognize what's happening to your marriage when you're right in the midst of the chaos of raising kids. It's very easy to say, well, yeah, that's important, but it's not as important as deal with my kids and all their little problems and issues right now. Got to take care of that. If you don't take the time to invest in your relationship with your spouse, then when those kids leave home, which they are supposed to do, then you and your spouse are going to be standing there staring at each other. What do we do now? You've lost the relationship that should have been there all along. So that's why I'm saying that it's important that you prepare for the empty nest before it comes. Stay active and involved and engaged with your spouse to the best of your ability. Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Here's some advice for empty nesters. First of all, enjoy your kids as adults, which means appreciate their individuality and their independence. Remember that earlier quote, your job is to raise your kids. Get them on a good start in their life. And when they grow up and become self-sustaining adults, you can take joy in watching them be the individuals they are. Whatever their talents, their skills, their ambitions in life, step back and watch it and enjoy it. Don't try to intrude. And that brings us to the next point is be available when needed. We're not saying throw up a brick wall between you and your kids when they leave home. Always be available. If they come to you seeking advice, wanting to talk about problems or issues, fine, yeah, go for it. But don't inject yourself into their lives. When you start trying to control them from outside their new independence as adults, they're going to resent that. You're going to end up with the same kind of dysfunctional family that Isaac and Rebekah had with their two boys. You don't want that. So give them space. Let them make their mistakes in life. And if they ever feel the burden such that they need to come and talk to you, sure, be available. Sit down and talk with them. Let them know that you still care, you still love them. You'll support them as best you can. But let them make the move. Don't you intrude into their lives. Stay active. Be busy in your work, in volunteering, travel, pursuing hobbies. This is the sort of thing that if you've done this sort of thing prior to the kids leaving home, it's just going to be a natural transition into having more time to spend on these sort of things after they leave. Keep learning, keep growing, keep improving. Read more, pursue further education. Do the kinds of things that you didn't have time to do when you were busy raising your kids. Well, now you've got the time to expand your horizons. Take advantage of the new freedom that you have. And then finally, make time for the grandkids. I have heard stories of parents who raised their kids had kids, and the parents, the grandparents now, were just either too involved, too detached, too out of it to even acknowledge that the grandkids were around. And that's sad. Take the time to be with the grandkids and enjoy that while you can. And that's a good segue to the lesson we're going to be looking at next week, and that is grandparenting, what it means to be a grandparent. Okay, any closing questions, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, on your boundaries, it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the parents staying out of the kids, but the kids need to not try to run the parents' lives either.
Yeah, good point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's got to be
It goes both ways. Yeah, yeah. There's a new relationship now that exists that didn't exist before. Yeah, good point. All right. Thank you very much.